Nathan Wilson, a 42-year-old architect from Chicago, thought his life was perfect: a loving wife, Laura, a cozy home, and a successful career. But one chance meeting at a corporate event shatters his world. Betrayal, lies and secrets in his wife's phone push him on the path of cold-blooded, but just revenge. Can Nathan regain his dignity without losing himself? Find out how the truth changes everything. Nathan Wilson, a 42-year-old architect from Chicago, had always thought his life was close to perfect. His wife, Laura, a 39-year-old marketing specialist, was his rock, sharp-witted, radiant, with a smile that could light up a room. Their home in Lincoln Park was a haven of warmth. Hardwood floors gleamed under soft lamplight, framed photos of their early years lined the walls, and the small backyard garden held memories of late-night talks about dreams they'd yet to chase. Together for 12 years, married for 9, they were the couple friends envied: stable, grounded, the kind of pair who seemed to have it all figured out. But lately, Nathan had started noticing cracks in the foundation of their life, subtle but persistent, like a faint hum you only hear when the house goes quiet. It started with small things. Laura's work hours stretched longer, her excuses for late nights growing vague, just a campaign deadline. You know how it is. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now always face down, notifications silenced. A new perfume had appeared on her vanity, a heavy floral scent that clung to the air like an uninvited guest. A sample from a client event, she'd said with a shrug when he asked, but her eyes didn't meet his. Nathan brushed it off at first. Marriage, he told himself, was about trust, not nitpicking. But the unease lingered, a quiet weight in his chest. On a crisp Friday evening in April, their company hosted a lavish corporate event at a rooftop restaurant in downtown Chicago. The venue was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls framed the glittering skyline, string lights twinkled like stars above sleek planters, and a jazz quartet played smooth renditions of old pop hits in the corner. The invitation had called for cocktail attire, so Nathan wore a tailored navy suit, his only pair of polished black loafers, and a tie Laura had picked out for him years ago. He wasn't one for these events. Small talk with colleagues he only knew through email threads felt like a chore, but he went for Laura. She thrived in these settings, her laughter always the loudest, her charm pulling people into her orbit. As he sipped a glass of Cabernet at the bar, Nathan scanned the crowd for her. She texted earlier, "Stuck in a meeting, grab me a Pinot Noir?" Face-blowing kiss. The emoji felt like a small anchor, a reminder of the woman who still sent him silly texts after all these years. He smiled, but the crowd parted, and his gaze landed on something that made his breath catch. Laura wasn't stepping off the elevator, as he'd expected. She was already there, tucked into a corner of the terrace under the warm glow of a heat lamp, half hidden by a cluster of tall ornamental grasses. Her black dress hugged her frame, elegant but daring, and her laughter, bright, unguarded, carried over the hum of the party. She wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was Kevin, the new marketing manager who'd transferred from the New York office 6 months ago. Kevin was all charisma, tall, with a jawline that seemed carved for magazine covers and a laugh that made every story sound like an inside joke. Laura had mentioned him before, always with a playful smirk. He's got that big city energy, you know? Thinks he's too cool for Chicago. Nathan hadn't thought much of it then, but now, watching them, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Laura leaned in, her hand brushing Kevin's arm as she laughed at something he said. Kevin's eyes lingered on her, his smile too familiar, too intimate for a coworker. Nathan stood frozen, the wineglass cold against his palm. He wanted to look away, to pretend he hadn't seen them, but his feet wouldn't move. The jazz quartet shifted to a slower tune, and the chatter around him faded into a dull roar. He noticed the way Laura tilted her head, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, the same gesture she used to make when they were dating, when she'd hang on his every word. Kevin said something else, and her laugh rang out again, sharp and carefree, like she was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Nathan wasn't. He took a step closer, then stopped. What was he going to do? Storm over and demand an explanation? Make a scene in front of half the company? No, that wasn't him. Nathan was the steady one, the guy who fixed problems quietly, who built things that lasted. But standing there, watching his wife share a moment with another man that felt stolen from their marriage, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, creeping realization that the life he thought he knew might be a facade. He set the glass of Pinot Noir on a nearby table, untouched, and turned toward the elevator. The doors slid open, and he stepped inside, the city's lights blurring as they closed. He didn't look back. The night air hit him hard when he reached the street. sharp with the scent of wet pavement and exhaust. Chicago pulsed around him, cars honking, pedestrians laughing, the distant wail of a siren, but it all felt louder, harsher, like the city was mocking his silence. He checked his phone once, half expecting a text from Laura, an apology for being late, a question about where he'd gone. Nothing. Just her earlier message, that kiss emoji staring back at him like a cruel joke. As he walked to his car, Nathan's mind replayed the scene on the rooftop. Laura's laugh, Kevin's smirk, the way they seemed to exist in a bubble that didn't include him. He didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity: something had changed. The foundation he'd spent years building wasn't as solid as he'd thought, and the cracks were starting to show. Nathan Wilson drove home from the rooftop party in silence, the hum of Chicago's streets filling the void where his thoughts should have been. The image of Laura laughing with Kevin, her hand grazing his arm, looped in his mind like a video he couldn't pause. It wasn't just the moment itself, it was how natural it looked, how effortless. Like they'd done it 100 times before. Nathan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the leather. He wasn't angry, not yet. But the seed of doubt planted on that rooftop was already sprouting, its roots curling into every corner of his life. Back at their Lincoln Park home, Nathan sat in the dimly lit living room, the TV flickering on mute. Laura's Pinot Noir sat untouched on the coffee table, a silent accusation. He checked his phone again, still no message from her. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m. When he finally heard the front door creak open, his chest tightened. Laura's heels clicked against the hardwood, and her voice called out, bright and casual, as if nothing had happened. "Nate? You still up? God, that party was endless." She kicked off her shoes by the door, her silhouette moving through the hallway. He didn't answer right away. She appeared in the doorway, still in that black dress, her hair slightly mussed, a faint flush on her cheeks. "You left early," she said, tilting her head. "Everything okay?" Her tone was light, but her eyes flicked to the wine glass, then back to him, searching. Nathan met her gaze, really looked at her, and for a moment, he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it all: the laughter, the closeness, the way Kevin's presence seemed to eclipse his own. But then he noticed it, a faint smudge of lipstick on the rim of her water glass from earlier, a shade she hadn't worn in years. It was like a fingerprint at a crime scene. "Just tired," he said, his voice flat. Laura smiled, leaned down to kiss his forehead, and he caught a whiff of that new floral perfume, sharper now, mixed with something else, cologne, maybe, or the lingering scent of someone else's space. She didn't seem to notice his stiffness, or if she did, she chose to ignore it. "I'm beat," she said, yawning. "Gonna shower and crash." She disappeared upstairs, leaving Nathan alone with the weight of his suspicions. The next few days were a study in restraint. Nathan went through the motions: work, coffee, small talk with Laura over breakfast, but every interaction felt like a test he was failing. Her phone was never out of reach now, her notifications muted. She'd laugh off his questions about work, saying, "Oh, just the usual chaos," but her answers were too vague, too polished. At night, she'd scroll endlessly on her laptop, her face lit by the screen, and when he'd walk by, she'd tilt it away just enough to make him wonder. The Laura he knew, the one who'd leave sticky notes with silly doodles on his desk, who'd curl up against him during thunderstorms, was slipping away, replaced by someone who felt like a stranger sharing his bed. Then came the moment that shattered any hope of denial. One evening, Laura left her phone on the kitchen counter while she stepped out to grab takeout. A notification flashed across the screen, and Nathan's pulse quickened. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the device. He'd never been the type to snoop. Trust was the bedrock of their marriage, but the rooftop scene had changed him. He tapped the screen, and a message from Kevin appeared. "You were on fire tonight. Same spot tomorrow?" Winking face, the emoji hit like a punch. Below it, a thread of texts unfolded. Flirty, familiar, laced with inside jokes Nathan didn't understand. "Can't stop thinking about that wine bar. You make these late nights worth it." Each word was a blade, carving away the life he thought they had. Nathan set the phone down, his hands steady, but his mind reeling. He didn't confront her when she returned, her arms full of Thai food and her smile as bright as ever. "Pad Thai for you, extra spicy," she said, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. He nodded, ate in silence, and watched her laugh at some story about a coworker, her voice a little too cheerful. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Laura slept beside him, her breathing soft and even. He felt like he was drowning in the space between them, the gap widening with every lie she didn't know he'd uncovered. The next evening, he couldn't take it anymore. Laura had said she was running to the gym after work, but her gym bag looked too light, her sneakers too clean. Nathan told himself he was being paranoid, but the text burned in his memory. He grabbed his keys and drove, no plan, just a need to know. He found himself in the West Loop, a trendy pocket of Chicago filled with boutiques and bars. There, parked outside the Crimson Vine, a cozy wine bar they used to love, was Laura's silver SUV, its familiar dented bumper mocking him. Through the large front window, he saw her. Laura sat at a small table, her face lit by candlelight, laughing as Kevin leaned in, his hand resting casually on her wrist. They weren't kissing, weren't doing anything overt, but the ease between them, the way she tilted her head, the way he mirrored her smile, was louder than any confession. Nathan stood on the sidewalk, the April air biting his skin. The city buzzed around him, laughter from a nearby patio, the clink of glasses, the rumble of a passing L train, but he felt utterly alone. He didn't storm inside, didn't bang on the glass. He just watched, memorizing the scene, letting it sear into him. This wasn't a fling, a momentary lapse. This was intimacy, emotional if not physical, and it cut deeper than he'd expected. He turned back to his car, the numbness spreading like frost. As he drove home, the radio off, the streets blurring, he made a decision. He wouldn't confront her, not yet. He wouldn't let anger drive him. If Laura was building a life without him, he'd find out exactly how far it went. And then he'd make sure she faced the consequences. Nathan Wilson woke the morning after seeing Laura with Kevin at the Crimson Vine with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. The fog of doubt had lifted, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. His wife was betraying him, not just with late nights or flirty texts, but with a deliberate choice to build a world that didn't include him. The pain was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was no longer paralyzing. Nathan wasn't the type to scream or break things. He was an architect, a man who designed structures to withstand storms. If Laura and Kevin thought they could dismantle his life unnoticed, they were about to learn how wrong they were. He sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, and mapped out his next steps. Confronting Laura now would only lead to denials, tears, or worse, empty promises. He needed proof, undeniable and airtight, something that would leave no room for her to twist the truth. More than that, he needed a plan that wasn't just about ending their marriage, but about reclaiming his own dignity. This wasn't revenge in the petty sense, no slashed tires or public outbursts. It was justice, calculated and precise, like a blueprint drawn to scale. By noon, Nathan had made a call to a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Frank Collins, recommended by a colleague who'd navigated a messy divorce. They met at a diner in the Loop, the kind of place where the coffee was bitter and the booths were sticky. Frank, with his salt and pepper beard and notepad, listened as Nathan laid out the basics: Laura's late nights, the text from Kevin, the wine bar. "I don't want speculation," Nathan said, his voice steady. "I want evidence, dates, times, places. Whatever you can get." Frank nodded, jotting notes. "Sounds like you're building a case." "Smart. Emotional stuff clouds judgment. Stick to facts." He quoted a price, and Nathan didn't flinch. This was an investment in his future. While Frank began his work, Nathan turned his focus inward. The man he'd seen in the mirror lately, tired, hunched, weighed down by routine, wasn't who he wanted to be. He signed up for a gym in Lincoln Park, trading his usual evenings on the couch for weightlifting and treadmill runs. The burn in his muscles felt good, like he was forging something new. He updated his wardrobe, swapping faded polos for tailored shirts and sharp blazers. His barber, noticing the change, raised an eyebrow. "Big meeting or new lady? Nate?" Nathan just smiled. "Something like that." At work, he threw himself into his projects with a focus he hadn't had in years. His firm was designing a new community center in Wicker Park, and Nathan's innovative plans caught the eye of the senior partners. During a team meeting, they praised his sketches, and later that week, they called him into a glass-walled office to offer a promotion to lead architect. "You've been stepping up," his boss said, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is your moment." Nathan accepted with a nod, the weight of the title grounding him. He was rebuilding more than buildings, he was rebuilding himself. Laura noticed the changes, though she didn't seem to grasp their depth. One evening, as Nathan adjusted a new tie in the mirror, she leaned against the bedroom door, her eyes narrowing playfully. "What's with the glow-up, babe? You auditioning for GQ?" Her tone was light, but there was a flicker of unease in her expression, like she sensed the ground shifting beneath her. Nathan met her gaze in the reflection. "Just felt like a change," he said, his voice neutral. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, she lingered closer to him on the couch, her hand resting on his arm, as if trying to pull him back into the orbit she'd been drifting away from. Nathan didn't push her away, but he didn't lean in either. He was playing a longer game now. A week later, Frank Collins slid a manila folder across a park bench in Millennium Park. "You've got a solid case," he said, lighting a cigarette. Inside were photos of Laura and Kevin, leaving a hotel bar in the Loop, holding hands outside a cafe in River North, her head resting on his shoulder during a late-night Uber ride. There were screenshots of their texts, too, obtained through methods Frank didn't explain and Nathan didn't ask about. The messages were worse than he'd imagined. "Missed you at the meeting today. Can't wait for Thursday. You make this job worth it. L." Each word was a brick in the wall Nathan was building, separating the life he'd had from the one he was about to create. But there was more. Frank had dug into Kevin's work habits and found he'd been using company resources, emails, expense accounts, for personal outings with Laura. It was a violation of corporate policy, the kind that could cost him his job. Nathan tucked the folder under his arm, his mind already turning. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. Kevin had walked into his life like he owned it, and Nathan wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. He started laying the groundwork. He drafted an anonymous email to the company's HR department, attaching evidence of Kevin's misconduct but holding off on sending it. Timing was everything. He met with a divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Claire who specialized in clean, efficient separations. "You've got everything you need," she said, flipping through Frank's folder. "We can file whenever you're ready, and with this, she won't have much to fight with." Nathan nodded, but he wasn't ready, not yet. He wanted Laura to see the consequences of her choices, not just hear about them. At home, he kept up the facade. He cooked dinner, laughed at Laura's stories, even kissed her goodnight, though the act felt hollow, like signing a contract he'd already voided. She was oblivious, or maybe she was too deep in her own deception to notice. Her phone buzzed constantly now, and she'd glance at it with a smile she didn't bother hiding. Once, when she mentioned Kevin's brilliant pitch at work, Nathan's jaw tightened, but he just said, "Sounds like he's got it all figured out." Laura didn't catch the edge in his voice, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. Nathan's plan was coming together, piece by piece, like a structure rising from a blueprint. He wasn't just preparing to end his marriage. He was preparing to end the version of himself that had let this happen. The old Nathan, steady, trusting, invisible, was gone. In his place was a man who knew what he wanted, not just freedom, but the satisfaction of watching Laura and Kevin face the truth they thought they could bury. He didn't know when the moment would come, but he knew it was close. And when it arrived, he'd be ready. Nathan Wilson had spent weeks constructing his plan with the precision of an architect drafting a skyscraper. Every piece, Frank's evidence, his own transformation, the anonymous email to HR, had been placed with care, waiting for the moment to bring it all crashing down. That moment arrived at the company's next corporate event, a sleek dinner held in a private room at a downtown Chicago steakhouse. The air was thick with the scent of seared ribeye and red wine, and the chatter of colleagues buzzed under the glow of modern chandeliers. Nathan hadn't wanted to attend. Crowds and forced smiles felt like a waste of energy, but his boss insisted, and Nathan saw an opportunity. If Laura and Kevin thought they could hide their betrayal in plain sight, he'd use the spotlight to expose them. He arrived late, slipping into the room in a tailored charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. The gym sessions and new wardrobe had sharpened his presence, and heads turned as he crossed the floor. Laura was already there, holding court at a table near the front, her laugh cutting through the noise. She wore a deep green dress, her hair swept up, and Kevin sat beside her, his arm draped casually over the back of her chair. They looked comfortable, too comfortable, like a couple who'd forgotten they were supposed to be discreet. Nathan's stomach twisted, but he kept his expression neutral, grabbing a whiskey from the bar and settling at a table across the room. The evening dragged on with toasts and speeches about teamwork and vision. Nathan barely listened, his eyes flicking to Laura. She was in her element, charming the room, but every so often, she'd glance at Kevin, her smile softening in a way that made Nathan's jaw clench. He sipped his drink, counting the minutes. Then, during a lull in the program, a senior VP raised a glass to balance, "Work hard, love well." The table erupted in cheers, and Laura, a few glasses of wine in, leaned forward with a grin. "You want to know the trick to a happy marriage," she said, loud enough for the room to hush. "Marry someone like Nate, reliable, pays the bills, like Wi-Fi you don't notice till it's gone." She laughed, tossing her head back, and Kevin joined in, his chuckle sharp and smug. The room exploded with laughter, colleagues nudging each other, oblivious to the cruelty in her words. Nathan felt the air thicken, the weight of every eye on him. For a split second, he was back on that rooftop, watching Laura lean into Kevin, her betrayal a quiet knife. But this time, he wasn't frozen. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and raised his glass. The room quieted, curiosity rippling through the crowd. "I'd like to say something," he said, his voice calm but carrying the kind of authority that silenced chatter. Laura's smile faltered, her eyes locking onto his. Kevin shifted in his seat, his smirk fading. "Dove," Nathan began, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Laura, "is the foundation of everything: work, life, marriage. It's what holds us together when things get tough. But when someone betrays that trust, when they choose to lie, to hide, to mock what matters most, the truth has a way of coming out." His words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Whispers started at the edges of the room. Laura's face drained of color, her fingers tightening around her wineglass. Kevin's jaw twitched, his eyes darting to the exit. Nathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim manila envelope. He crossed the room, the click of his shoes echoing in the silence, and placed it on the table in front of Laura. "This is for you," he said softly, his voice steady but laced with finality. Her hands trembled as she opened it, pulling out the divorce papers. Gasps rippled through the room, and Laura's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Nate," she whispered, barely audible. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer, just held her gaze for a moment, letting her see the man she'd underestimated. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising just enough to carry. "I've always believed in honesty. It's why I've given my all to this company, to my work, to my life. But some people think they can play by different rules." He looked at Kevin, whose face had gone pale. "They think no one's watching. They're wrong." With that, Nathan nodded to his boss, set his glass on the table, and walked out, the room erupting in murmurs behind him. He didn't need to stay to know what would happen next. Earlier that day, Nathan had sent the anonymous email to HR, attaching Frank's evidence of Kevin's misuse of company resources and his inappropriate relationship with Laura. By morning, the department would launch an investigation, and Kevin's career would hang in the balance. Laura's reputation, so carefully curated, would crumble under the weight of her own choices. Nathan hadn't just ended their marriage, he'd ensured they'd both face consequences, not with fists or shouting, but with the quiet power of truth. Outside, the Chicago night was alive with sound, horns blaring, laughter spilling from nearby bars, the distant rumble of the L train. Nathan stood on the sidewalk, the cool air sharp against his skin. His phone buzzed in his pocket, Laura's name flashing on the screen. He let it go to voicemail. Then another call, and another. He silenced it, staring up at the skyline, its light steady against the dark. For the first time in months, he felt unburdened, like a building stripped to its core, ready to be rebuilt. Back at home, he knew Laura would try to salvage things. She'd come in tearful, promising change, begging for a chance to explain. But Nathan was done listening. He'd seen her for who she was, not the woman he'd married, but someone who'd traded their life for a fleeting thrill. As he drove through the city, the streets glowing under sodium lights, he felt a strange calm. The reckoning wasn't over, but the hardest part was. He'd taken back control, not with anger, but with a plan that left no room for doubt. Whatever came next, he'd face it on his terms. Nathan Wilson stood on the balcony of his new loft in Chicago's River North, a glass of whiskey in hand, the city skyline sprawling before him like a promise kept. It had been 3 months since the night at the steakhouse, when he'd laid bare Laura's betrayal with a single envelope and a few choice words. The divorce was finalized now, the papers signed in a sterile lawyer's office with no fanfare, no tears, at least not from him. The house in Lincoln Park was sold, its memories packed away or left behind. Nathan's life, once anchored by routine and a marriage he thought would last forever, was his own again. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The fallout from that night had unfolded swiftly. Laura's carefully curated image as the company's golden girl unraveled as whispers of her affair with Kevin spread. Colleagues who once fawned over her charm now kept their distance, their smiles tight and guarded. The HR investigation Nathan had triggered hit Kevin harder. The evidence of his misuse of company resources, expense reports for personal dinners, emails sent on company servers, was damning. By the end of the week, Kevin was out of a job, his New York swagger reduced to a LinkedIn profile begging for connections. Laura, though not fired, was sidelined, her projects reassigned to junior staff. The golden couple had fallen, not with a bang, but with the quiet thud of consequences. Laura had tried to salvage things in the days after the dinner. She'd come home that night, her eyes red, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and defiance. "Nate, please," she'd said, standing in the kitchen, the divorce papers still clutched in her hand. "This isn't what you think. I messed up, okay? But we can fix this. I'll quit, I'll cut him off, I'll do therapy, whatever you want." Her words were desperate, but Nathan saw through them. They weren't apologies. They were negotiations, a last-ditch effort to save herself from the mess she'd made. He'd looked at her, really looked, and felt nothing. No anger, no love. Just the hollow space where their marriage used to be. "You made your choice," he'd said, his voice steady. "Now live with it." She'd cried then, loud and messy, but he'd walked away, closing the guest room door behind him. The weeks that followed were a blur of logistics, moving out, signing papers, splitting assets. Laura stayed in a friend's apartment, her social media dormant, her phone calls to Nathan unanswered. He heard through a colleague that she'd tried to reach out to Kevin, but he'd ghosted her, already chasing his next opportunity in another city. Nathan didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in their downfall, only a quiet relief that the truth had done its work. His revenge hadn't been about destruction. It was about justice, about refusing to let their lies define him. Nathan threw himself into his new life with the same focus he'd brought to his plan. His promotion to lead architect came with a corner office and a team that respected his vision. The Wicker Park Community Center project was gaining buzz, with local papers calling it a landmark of inclusive design. Outside of work, he rediscovered pieces of himself he'd let fade. He joined a cycling group, the early morning rides through Chicago's lakefront trails clearing his mind. He took an evening class on modern art at the Art Institute, striking up conversations with strangers who didn't know his past. One night, over coffee with a woman from the class, a curator with a quick laugh and sharp wit, he realized he could still feel something like hope. The loft was his sanctuary, all clean lines and open space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let the city's pulse in. He'd furnished it simply, a leather couch, a wooden dining table, a shelf of books he actually wanted to read. No family photos, no relics of the life he'd left behind. On quiet nights, he'd sit on the balcony, the hum of traffic below blending with the clink of ice in his glass. He thought about Laura sometimes, not with bitterness, but with a kind of detached curiosity. Where had it gone wrong? Was there a moment he could have seen it coming? He'd never know, and he was learning to be okay with that. One evening, as spring gave way to summer, Nathan found a letter slipped under his door. It was from Laura, handwritten on plain paper, the ink smudged in places. She wrote of regret, of sleepless nights, of realizing too late what she'd thrown away. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote, "but I need you to know I'm sorry. I lost myself, and I lost us." There was a plea for coffee, a chance to talk, but Nathan set the letter aside. He didn't hate her. He didn't feel enough to hate her. She was a chapter closed, a blueprint discarded for something stronger. Standing on his balcony now, the city alive below, Nathan sipped his whiskey and let his thoughts settle. He'd spent years building a life for two, only to watch it crumble. But in its place, he'd built something else, something his. The pain of Laura's betrayal had been a fire, but it hadn't destroyed him. It had tempered him, burning away the parts that were weak, leaving only what was solid. He wasn't the man who'd stood on that rooftop, clutching a glass of wine and a fading hope. He was Nathan Wilson, architect of his own future, and that was enough. As the skyline glowed against the dusk, he raised his glass to the city, to himself. "To new beginnings," he said softly, the words swallowed by the wind. He didn't need Laura's apologies or Kevin's downfall to move forward. True justice wasn't in their ruin. It was in his freedom, in the life he was building, brick by brick, on a foundation no one could shake.